The last 2.5 decades have seen scientists, economists, politicians say again and more often that we need to change economic direction. We need a green economy, a circular economy. Otherwise, how will we avoid climate change? How will we ensure ecological security? How will we achieve sustainable development? But despite all that agreement, we are still hurtling towards planetary boundaries on greenhouse gas emissions, on phosphorus depletion, on nitrogen pollution, on biodiversity loss, on ecosystem degradation. The list goes on. So why is this? I think this is because we really haven't paid enough attention to what's really driving the economy. Look at this. 3/4 of the economy, measured in GDP and jobs in the US, is private sector. Worldwide, that answer is 2/3. It is today's corporation that is driving resource use and economic direction. And today's corporation is not, with apologies to some in the audience, the small family business or the small and medium enterprise or even the big family business. It is the multinational corporation. Now, the question that begs to be asked is, therefore, is today's corporation going to deliver us tomorrow's green and sustainable economy? Well, I've been looking at this issue for some time, and there are some patterns that emerge if you look at the economic history of the corporation over the last 100 years. The pursuit of profits has become a pursuit of size. And we see this in examples like Volkswagen, for instance. They wanted to become the world's #1 car company, beating Toyota. So they invested in some diesel technology and some special software. And the rest is history. Let's look at history. In the last 40 years, 1970 to 2010, the number of corporations whose turnover exceeded 0.1% of global GDP, that's like a small country, went up from just 20 companies to 120 companies. That's the kind of bulking up of size that I'm talking about. Today's corporation, the multinational, has become kind of an international arbitrageur of sorts, arbitraging resources where mining licenses are cheapest and easily available, usually some African country, arbitraging labor where it's available in supply, China, India, Bangladesh, and then arbitraging manufacturing capacity from wherever that's most easily provided and subsidized, Korea, Malaysia, India, and obtaining consumer markets where they are richest, the US, Japan, Europe, and the high net worth sections of the BRIC countries. That is today's multinational, and that's really what's driving this economy. Another thing that we see coming up again and again is leverage and the use of leverage. And this is literally ignoring all the lessons that we've learned over the last 4 recessions, which have been driven by the overuse of leverage, excessive leverage, or the abuse of leverage. The net result of this is that the corporation becomes what we call too big to fail. And by this, I don't just mean the banks being too big to fail because, clearing and settlement would stop. But I'm talking about insurance companies, AIG, too big to fail, needs to be rescued. Car companies, General Motors, too big to fail, another rescue, right? Swissair Airlines, too big to fail. Oh, how could I forget? Hedge funds, LTCM, remember? Too big to fail. Hedge funds, these sort of Mother Teresa outfits who need us taxpayers' money to save them, when markets get tough. Whatever happened to this concept, in economics, we had this concept that markets are supposed to punish the misallocation of capital. What happened to that one, I wonder? Something else I've noticed is the increasing and aggressive use of lobbying, which has almost become part of the job of senior management and a highly effective return on their time. It's about tilting the playing field so that it's tilted in your direction, keeps out competition, keeps the advantages and licenses you have in your hands. And sometimes it means also obfuscating reality. And this can go on for decades at a time. Take Exxon, for instance. In 1977, their scientists told the management that there was a significant problem with emissions from fossil fuels, which would cause climate change. In the early 80s, their own ships went out carrying state-of-the-art equipment to test this theory, and the results were conclusive. And immediately after that, and for the next 30 years, they went into an aggressive campaign of climate denial, successfully defeating a number of climate regulations and controls. How could I also forget leaded gasoline? That went on for 60 years. It was, in fact, in 1920, early 20s, that research at both Yale and Harvard University proved that there was serious health damage from leaded gasoline. But of course, it was only in the 70s and 80s that this was banned. So these are all the results of lobbying in this case, from Standard Oil way back, and then General Motors, and then many other car companies. And then the use of advertising without ethics. And advertising is, after all, about opinions. It's not about facts. It is about persuasion. It's not about information. And it's also there basically to create desirability. You know, like the desirability of cigarette smoking, which you saw in so many advertisements on television, until, of course, 5 decades later, radio and television advertising was banned for cigarettes. We have all of this happening and leading to what I call externalities, the third-party costs of doing business as usual. And the size of corporate externalities is absolutely humongous. We are talking about trillions of dollars of public costs of making these private profits. This is the biggest free lunch in the history of mankind. So we have an agency problem of monumental proportions because the economy's main agent, that is the corporation, is basically moving the economy in the wrong direction. So what do we do? What's the theory of change? Well, firstly, I must not apologize for the complexity of these slides that I'm going to show you and talk you through, because we have a complex problem. And I'm afraid complex problems only have complex solutions. And the complex problem we have right now with the economy's main agent is that it's leading to and driving excessive demand because of uncontrolled consumerism driven by the corporation. It's leading to underpriced supply, and basically everything is really unreal in price terms. And it's leading to very damaging resource depletion. And of course, and most of all, in my opinion, it's leading to public capital losses, especially the loss of natural capital in the process of making private profits. But driving all these big picture, system-wide macro issues, we find that there are, in fact, micro-level drivers at the corporation level, and that is the problem. But the good news is that there are also micro-level solutions. So when we look at marketing and advertising, it is actually the ad brilliance of corporations and their advertising agencies, which converts human insecurities into wants, wants into needs, needs into demand, demand into production, production into profits, and thereby hangs a tail. It is, of course, possible to correct this, and one possible good example is the European Cosmetics Association, which actually has detailed rules about, for example, how not to use sex and children in advertising. We look at leverage. Again, this is, of course, a problem, but there are solutions. We've used capital limits in the past quite successfully. Consortium arrangements have worked, and so on. The problem with resources and excessive use of resources is partly because we don't tax resource use or excessive use of resources. And that's coming because of the typical tendency of taxing the goods and not taxing the bads. However, Norway has a 79% tax on resources, on fossil fuels extracted in the North Sea. And when I asked the Environment and Development Minister, Erik Solheim, don't the companies complain? I mean, won't they leave? He just smiled in reply. He said, yes, they've been complaining for the last 25 years, but they're still here. And last but not the least, the externalization of costs. Today, we are within 2 weeks of the launch of something called the Natural Capital Protocol, This is a huge exercise involving all of the forum accountancy majors and most of the large corporations. Over 50 companies have committed to be pilots. This natural capital protocol will basically provide a framework for any company anywhere to be able to measure and disclose its impacts on nature, on environmental impacts. If we follow all these things, I believe we will achieve a different kind of cooperation. A cooperation is like a species. It responds like any species to its environment, which in this case is policies, prices, and institutions. I believe we can, through this approach, achieve a change in the cooperation towards one which basically heralds in stakeholder capitalism, not just shareholder capitalism, which has goals aligned with society, which is a custodian of nature and takes care to reduce, limit, and manage its environmental impacts, which is a community that builds social capital, such as Natura in Brazil, which is a company which is selling cosmetics and personal products, not through shops because it doesn't have any, but through 1.5 million housewives who are trained by the company, who are paid 33% commission, and who in the process not only earn self-respect and income, but are able to use it to educate and provide better health for their children. There are companies who act as institutes. Infosys, India's information technology giant, trains 30,000 new graduates every year in its university. Some of them will leave, as people do, and they will carry with them that knowledge, training, skill, and brand value, externalities which are positive for the corporation. This sounds good, but are investors interested? And the interesting thing is, if you look at the recent statistics, they are. The amount of assets, debt and equity, that are taken through the lens of sustainability has increased almost 30% per year, from $13 trillion to $21 trillion. And what this means is that the investors are looking at assets which are almost now 1/10 of the total asset class around the world of 215 trillion. Companies are beginning to measure their impacts, their externalities, and beginning to report them. Integrated reporting has been around for a bit, but now what we are seeing with these leading companies, some of whom are my clients, is that they are measuring externalities in economic and social terms and putting them out for others to see. These are companies from chemicals to forestry to luxury travel to a water utility, but unfortunately these are still too few for any real change. So the question is, how can we scale up and speed up this evolution? Well, I'm going to do my small bit for that. I have decided to put the IP, the intellectual property of my company, on the web. So the IP&L process that we do for our clients will become public knowledge. I'm also... And I'm now looking for money to raise capital so that we can create a very simplified package so that even the SME can make use of this technology. Something, the $199 variety, which can be made available easily. And frankly, once we've done that, I think the cost barrier will have gone away. And then I will be targeting not 10 potential users, but 10,000 users. And at that point, I'm sure the accountancy firms will think, why can't this be done on a regular basis for all the world? I think that of all the changes that can possibly usher in the era of Corporation 2020, this is probably the one that will matter most. Wish me luck. Thank you.